Decision to cancel the meeting was made this morning. Let's get reaction from Capitol Hill. Joining us now, Republican Congressman Steve King of Iowa. He's among a small group of Republican lawmakers who had already nominated President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize ahead of this summit. So what do you think, Congressman? Summit now canceled. Was the nomination premature?
Well, you know, I think we paused that nomination for a little while. We always knew that that was going to take some months for that to unfold. And I'm disappointed by this action that has taken place. That I don't think the president's judgment is incorrect on this. If you have Kim Jong Un insulting Mike Pence, I mean, Mike Pence is anything but what he's described by the dictator from North Korea. And to threaten nuclear war over this, I think the best thing that can come from it now is tamp these fires down and flatten it out a little bit, cool things off, and let's see if we can get back and restart some kind of negotiations. But I do give President Trump a lot of credit for opening up these negotiations, for being willing to accept the invitation that was offered to him to negotiate with Kim Jong Un, that was offered actually by the South Koreans, and that changed the dynamics. And you can see through this to the point where perhaps one day we see a denuclearized Korean peninsula, and perhaps the 38th parallel gets torn down, and we can see Korea become like Germany did after November 9th in 1989, Wolf.
Well, as you know, the North Koreans were really upset that not just Mike Pence, the vice president, but the president's national security advisor, John Bolton, both were raising what was called the Libyan model. Remember, after the war in Iraq, Muammar Gaddafi of Libya, he gave up his program for weapons of mass destruction, including a nuclear weapon. We know years later what happened to Muammar Gaddafi, and this is a sensitive issue for the North Koreans, and that's why they were so angry at Mike Pence and John Bolton. Did they have a point?
Well, you know, I think bringing up the Libyan model, if you look at the Libyan model that was constructed under George W. Bush's administration, it was successful. And then Gaddafi met his end there under the Obama administration. I think that unease about transitioning from one presidency to another does play a factor here, especially in a culture of people that are living under intergenerational dictatorships. And so the unease I do understand. Perhaps bringing up the Libyan model was not a wise thing in the long run. But the first part of the Libyan model was working. Gaddafi gave up his nuclear preparations, and because he didn't want to see what would happen next. And so now it's a big guess on how this works out in Korea. But I am still hopeful that we find a way to denuclearize that peninsula without war, and that one day that 38th parallel will be torn down and they can all be a free people. South Korea is so prosperous. They've got such a work ethic, such an educational foundation. They've sent at least 8 million South Koreans to the United States for an education. That whole country has been rebuilt since their war in the last 60 to 70 years. That same thing could be in store for North Korea if we could just get past Kim Jong Un.
All right, well, let's see what happens. Lots of uncertainty right now. Let me turn to another issue, an issue very close to your heart, the issue of immigration. You've been proposing actual legislation, Congressman, that would jail officials in what are called sanctuary cities here in the United States if they tip off undocumented immigrants about sweeps from ICE, federal officials who are looking for these individuals. And you've specifically named it after the Oakland, California Mayor Libby Schaaf, who alerted residents about a sweep. Here's what Mayor Schaaf told CNN about your legislation. Listen to this.
It is not possible that legislation like that could be legal. Sanctuary city policies are legal policies. They've been well researched. They are within the confines of what local and state jurisdictions are allowed to do. That is part of the beauty of American democracy, a balance between local, state, and federal power. And I can tell you that I know a lot more about what makes my community safe than a Congress member from Iowa.
All right, so let's talk about it. Let's get your reaction. She says what you're calling for isn't legal.
Well, Wolf, I mean, I'm smiling, and I probably shouldn't be, but it strikes me there are so many things wrong with that statement. She's got to live in another zone, different from me. There isn't this balance about this law. The Constitution of the United States, in which California signs on to, is the supreme law of the land. It specifically says so in the Constitution. You don't get to trump federal law by coming up with an idea at the local level. And however much research she has, we know there are activist lawyers that will write whatever they want, but for 20+ years, it has been against the law for local jurisdictions to establish sanctuary city policies. And because we have not done an effective job of enforcing that, we've seen this go to some 300 or more jurisdictions around the country with sanctuary city policies. Now an entire state of California is a sanctuary state. And now they're defying federal law, and they believe that they have a state's right to define federal law, not when it's an enumerated power. And so to know that what's more about safety and what keeps the people safe in Oakland over this congresswoman from Iowa, I don't think she has a leg to stand on.
Well, she makes the point. They make the point, as you know, Congressman, that if these undocumented immigrants, these undocumented individuals didn't feel safe in going to police and reporting about a possible crime, they would just remain quiet, and the communities as a whole would be more endangered if they stayed silent. Your reaction?
Well, she's the mayor of the 10th most dangerous city in the United States of America, which doesn't comport very well with the assertion she knows more than I do about the safety in the streets. And if we enforce our immigration laws, as I have advocated for a long, long time, there wouldn't be illegals there that you would need for witnesses. So I say no, let's apply federal law. And when federal law says that when people who are unlawfully present in America are encountered by law enforcement, they shall be placed in removal proceedings. That's the law. It would clean up Oakland. We had to send federal agents in there because they refused, and they turned them out on the streets. And then she blew the warning whistle off and saved several hundred of them from being incarcerated. How much crime is committed as a result of that? The price for that is paid by the victims of crime, like Kate Steinle.
Congressman Steve King, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
There's more news unfolding. The actor Morgan Freeman and now